We'll move on to the LA Kings now. They're tied for second with Seattle, as I mentioned earlier. 56 points in 46 games, so they've played 4 more than the Kraken. Let's talk about LA. It's been an up and down season for the Kings. They've gotten lucky themselves with their goaltending, which we'll get to. But Case, your grade for the Kings?
Yeah, I was kind of torn between an A- and a B+ for these guys. Kind of a similar Seattle story for myself. I did land at A- because I think that they're not overachieving or underachieving. They're kind of exactly where we expect them to be, and that's an A- in my mind for these guys when it comes to, they're in a playoff spot, obviously. Their forwards are deep and very well structured. I love this team when I look at their forwards. Their top 6 is good and their bottom 6 is good, and everyone fits in their roles. It's great. The defense gets a little more sketchy for me, but there are some guys that are really standing out on this team, like obviously Doughty and Dursey, and then Mikey Anderson's playing well. So that's another positive for me. Velarde's a positive for me. The negatives are the goaltending situation for sure. How long can you ride on Copley being as good as he's been? You had to send Peterson down, who you signed a massive contract to, and then Jonathan Quick is deteriorating as well. So that's a scary situation. And again, this team's penalty kill is just as bad as Seattle's at time. I think they're 27th in the league. And so those are my negatives, but those are negatives that I think this team can overcome. And they're not overachieving or underachieving. They are actually, where were they? Goals against above expected is high, and their goals for above expected is a -6. So again, this team should kind of equal out and land where they are right now, 3rd in the Pacific.
Yeah, I mean, that checks out. That seems to kind of match the eye test when looking at the LA Kings. Like they're a team who has gotten poor goaltending all year. They put their $5 million goalie on waivers and nobody picked him up. So it shows you how, a big contract, mind you, but it shows you how bad their goaltending has been, putting Cal Peterson on waivers. But yeah, Case, I was between those 2 grades as well, an A- and a B+. I ended up settling on a B+. Right now, Money Puck has them at 77% chance to make the playoffs. I love their forward group as well. Velarde, obviously, kind of a local guy. Love to see it. And the reason I went with a B+ rather than an A- though is because of 2 players in particular who we thought would be better at this time, and it's Quinton Byfield and Alex Turcotte. Both players are under a point per game in the American Hockey League. Byfield has at least been up and down to the NHL in between the 2 leagues, but I just thought at this point in both of their careers there would be more production, and I think LA and their management thought the same thing. So, if those 2 players were at a level that some other players drafted around them were at, or are at currently, like I'm looking at, a Tim Stützle, for example, who was drafted 3rd in that Byfield draft, it would be a different team, and I think they could potentially be a powerhouse if they had more production out of the plethora of young players that they've had in the pipeline for, it seems like, forever now. So I do like what they've been doing this season. I think they're only going to get better as their goaltending kind of comes back to earth and starts getting better itself. But yeah, I couldn't quite go with an A grade or even an A- just because, I want more out of those younger players. I think they're good enough. They just haven't shown it yet. That's the only thing.
Settle the argument, Hart. Well, not really an argument, but you know what I mean.
Yeah. Well, not much of an argument from my side, but I've got LA at a B+ as well. I think that was fair for them. Phoenix Copley has kind of saved their season. He's 12-2 in his last 14 games, and who the heck saw that coming? So they've gotten extremely lucky between the pipes. Peterson down the American Hockey League. I'm surprised he hasn't been back up yet at this point. He makes $5 million. That's an issue, obviously. And he's not the only casualty. We saw Alex Nedeljkovic get sent down the other day by the Detroit Red Wings. That's $3 million right there as a little side note. And then, as you guys mentioned, Jonathan Quick is on the backside of 30. But Rob Blake and the Kings are kind of in an interesting spot. They've got a lot of kids. They've made a lot of picks, but they've kind of boxed out some of these young players because they have Kopitar and Doughty, who I think said that we don't know how much longer we have left. We want to be competitive and be a playoff team and everything, and which is totally fair. But I feel like, you know, guys like Byfield and Turcotte, who we haven't really seen yet and may not even pan out, who knows, as a high first round pick. But there are some young players that they have in their system who have kind of been boxed out a little bit, and unfortunately that's just the way it goes sometimes. But look, this is a team that took Edmonton to 7 games in the first round last year. They're one of those teams for me that they're highly entertaining. Kevin Fiala has been a perfect fit for them, and they just need to get in, and they'll be a tough out no matter what. But it's been a really up and down season for them, and if it weren't for Copley here, like, we'd be talking about this team, I think, outside of the playoffs, in my opinion. So we really don't know until the more consistent goaltending comes, and it can't just be Copley.
I think the difference, I always kind of compare these guys with Chicago at all times because they're both so good at the same time. I think what's differentiated them is, Chad, like, you guys both touched on it, like the boxing out of their young guys. Well, they box out the young guys with bringing in great players. To talk to Harp's point, they bring in, you know, Arvidsson, Danault, and Fiala. All of those guys are playing spectacular. And then to talk to Chad's point of, like, their young superstars haven't panned out quite yet. Well, it doesn't matter as much for them when guys like Adrian Kempe kind of blow up out of nowhere. Lizotte is like a good third center, or whatever you want to call him. He's kind of come out of nowhere. They've had some, you know, depth picks and depth players really blow up, and that's kind of the difference. You haven't seen that in Chicago at all.
Yeah, well, another guy is Trevor Moore, too, who's had success in LA.
Yeah,
He's currently hurt right now. But in Chicago, like, you could argue, you know, guys, actually 2 players who are currently in Detroit, Dominic Kubalik and Pui Suter, both of whom had good seasons in Chicago but then didn't stick around. So they kind of have had some of that, you know, homegrown talent succeed, but then they weren't able to keep them. So, I mean, like, LA, listen, the problem we already talked about really, I think, is the goaltending more than their young players not succeeding. That was just something for me, like, I wanted to see more out of both of those players this year because they've both been pretty quiet since being drafted. But like, to touch on the goaltending, just to kind of wrap up the conversation on LA, imagine if they still had Peterson and Jack Campbell at $10 million combined. Like, that would be a terrible tandem for way too much money. Holy.
No, Chad, it's goaltending voodoo. That'd be a William Jennings trophy winning team.
Yeah, true. They'd both be up for the Vezina.
Yeah.
Last thing on the Kings, you know, we've talked about their young players being boxed out and everything, but an encouraging sign is Gabriel Velarde, of course, who has finally come into his own. He's a bit of a late bloomer, like he's in his mid-20s now, and he's finally arrived. So that is encouraging. And as we know, with these centers who are big bodies, Tage Thompson, a great example, it can take till you get into your mid-20s to really come into your own, and we're seeing that with Velarde. So, hey, with their young players, with their prospect pool, that is an encouraging sign. And I could see the same thing happening with a guy like Quentin Byfield. So